You may not know this, but the TrainingBeta podcast is an offshoot of a website that I created in 2012, TrainingBeta.com. I created the website before there were a million training resources all over the internet, but we were one of the first websites to offer blog posts, podcasts, training resources like climbing coaching, nutrition coaching, mindset coaching, online training programs, all of the things that you need in order to become a better climber, a stronger person in general, and a braver climber. We've got all kinds of programs for you at TrainingBeta.com, plus coaching with Alex and Matt, plus nutrition and mindset coaching with me, and we would love to help you reach your goals with climbing. And you can find that all at TrainingBeta.com, and we hope to see you over there. This is the TrainingBeta podcast, and I'm your host, Neely Quinn. Thanks for joining me for another episode all about training for rock climbing. On this podcast, we talk about all aspects of training for climbing, including the physical parts, but also the mental parts. I'm a mindset coach myself for climbers, and I love this topic. My friend Alex Bridgewater just recently became a sports psychologist, and he is transitioning from being a climbing coach, where he mostly trained people on the physical side of things, to now really focusing on sports psychology with people. He wanted to talk about the ways that he works with people, and one of the main things that he does is called mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment therapy. And so we're going to talk about what that is. I know that sometimes when people hear the word mindfulness, it conjures really boring things, or maybe that's just me. But mindfulness has actually become a growing interest for me. And so I was really intrigued by the idea of talking to him about this. We talk about mindfulness as it relates to climbing in very common ways. So we talk about how to use mindfulness if you have a fear of falling, if you are comparing yourself with other climbers and it's causing you stress, if you have a fear of crowds. We talk about mindfulness tactics that you can use, how to incorporate it into your everyday life so that then when you're on the wall or at the crag or in the gym, it's easier for you to use it. And if you like what you hear, you can work with Alex. He works with people one-on-one, or he works with teams. He works with youth. He works with adults. And you can find his services at innersourceperformancepsychology.com. I'm going to say that again, innersourceperformancepsychology.com. And I'll remind you of that at the end as well. So without further ado, here is Alex Bridgewater, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll talk to you on the other side. All right, welcome back to the show, Alex. Thanks for talking with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, last time we talked, we were talking about a different topic because you kind of changed your trajectory a little bit. And so I'm excited to dig into what you've been learning and what you've been doing. But before we do that, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, can you tell me about yourself?
Sure. My name is Alex Bridgewater. I live in Lander, Wyoming currently, and have lived here for 8 years now, something like that. Yeah, I grew up climbing as a kid. It's been in my life since maybe 2005 or something. And yeah, kind of spanned the spectrum of engaging in most aspects with the climbing. And I moved out here as an athlete for ClimbStrong. I'm a coach for ClimbStrong and have been for most of my time here, maybe 7 years now. And throughout that time, I started as Charlie Manganello's athlete, which is fun, and transitioned into a coach. And yeah, throughout that time, I've helped develop the coaching program there, and really kind of came into understanding like the things that I really enjoy with coaching and helping people progress, but I really enjoy helping people like develop as a human being. And so that really sort of led me into pursuing a graduate degree in sport and performance psychology, which I just graduated in December. I've been in graduate school for 4 years. Um, Ended up finishing with a master's degree in sports psychology, and have since then opened my own business, which is called Inner Source Performance Psychology. And I work with all different types of athletes and people, not just rock climbers, which is super fun um, and quite enjoyable. I love working with climbers, and I have for a long time, but I also enjoy helping anybody.
Yeah.
And that my practice in that right spans the spectrum of like youth, adult, teams, individuals, professionals, um, novice athletes, and I quite enjoy helping them work through their own individual challenges and just
Great.
trying to be the best person that they can be, which is really where my philosophy stands.
Okay, so going back, I do want to know, why is this so interesting to you? Like, what has sports psychology, what impact has it had on your own climbing and other sport endeavors?
Mm. I think that a lot of the interest lies in that the biggest interest I have in the use of sports psychology, or even like an engagement with it, is having spent and continuing to spend a lot of time at the cliff with people, uh, and in the gyms. I mean, I have been spending more time down in the front range, and I I spend a lot of my time observing people and watching behavior more than output. And so, like, to be honest, I really don't care about people sending too much. Um, I care most about how people behave and watching what they do, and then trying to be like, okay, well, why are you doing that? Like, what are the norms that are happening right now with people? Is like, it's a lot of frustration. It's a lot of like getting in their own way. Um, And then you can see the people who are having the most success are typically having the most fun, which is kind of cliche, but also true. Um, and So I think like my interest had started from like just an internal question of like, I think I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky kind of person, and I try to see the best in life, and then I like have a great time most of the time at the cliff or in the gym. And I've always been curious, like, why are these other people just like losing it? Like, why are they not having a good time? Why are they not able to succeed despite all of the things that they're doing in the gym or training physically or whatever? And I think that it can be easy to say, like, uh, your mindset or focusing on somebody's mental game is like the linchpin for their success. And I don't think that it's like the end all be all, but I think that it is, like you were saying earlier, a neglected experience for people. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that people think that they can strong arm their way through their experience. And then when they come up against a difficulty or a setback, they're like, what the like, why can't I do this? I have done all of these things. I did everything my coach told me to do, and I've put in 100%. I've sacrificed all that I could for whatever, a boulder or a route or podium, and I didn't get there. And why is that? And that's where I kind of come back to this whole thing of like, well, do you know what you want? Do you know why you really want what you want? Do you know who you are as a human first? Um, because I think that those things from a fundamental level facilitate higher performance or better performance for people rather than the other way around.
Can you
Where
give me an example of that? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but like,
an example of building up somebody's understanding of themselves.
yeah, and how that translates into better performance.
Hmm. Well, yeah, like I don't know if I can give you a clear like individual's example other than like when people have a better, more clear understanding of the things that they value. So like values for people can be like joy or fun or challenge or community, um, which then gives their goals more meaning, right? Like if I value uh, play or adventure, and I'm subtly undermining my value of play, let's say, by going into the gym and engaging with a strict training routine that negates something like enjoyment or play for somebody, then eventually my energy or like my will to engage with that training program is going to run out because I'm trying so hard to move against something that I feel like is important to me for the sole purpose of, whatever, climbing 12C, let's say. I think that it's common. People think like, if I can get to this grade, 12C, whatever it is, then I will enjoy climbing more because I will have more opportunity or more will be available to me, or I'll feel better about myself because I climb at this grade. But what happens? People get there or they don't, and they find out that their self worth, in fact, has nothing to do with the grade. It's like, um, it's like the common saying is like the goalpost is always moving. Yeah. So, like, I think that helping people have a better understanding of why they do the things that they do gives them better motivation and confidence to engage in hardship, which, like, trying to get better at anything requires pain. It requires challenge, is painful, physically or mentally. And the problem is that it can be forgotten that when things get challenging, our body and our mind tend to go to like protective mode because that's like a natural evolutionary biological thing. Um, and so, because that happens, if we don't have a clear vision of who we are and what we want, it's easy to take the short way out. And so, if I can help somebody develop an understanding of like, oh, I go to the gym and I do these training sessions because I value growth and challenge, then I can connect those hard days to those things that I said I value. And those might change over time, but currently they are as such. And so I have this goal of climbing 12C. The way I'm going to get there is through these training sessions. And I do these training sessions because I value challenge and growth. And then that allows people to be reflective on their experience. And they can say like, okay, today I went into the gym to do this training session and I deviated from that. and just climbed with my homies on the kilter board. And while that was fun and exciting, I don't feel good about it at the end, because I can look back and say, did I act in line with my values? The answer would be no, because the training session felt challenging. So I walked away from it and went climbing with my homies, which felt good. And so if you can help somebody understand themselves on a fundamental level, you can also help them reflect more accurately to keep them in line with what they say they want. So if this person wants to climb 12C and they need to do certain types of training sessions to get there, finger strength, tension work, skill building, whatever, those things are going to be inherently challenging for that person if they have not achieved 12C yet. And if you can connect those inherently challenging things to values that they have as an athlete and a person, then they're more likely to continually engage with it and feel motivated by it rather than threatened by it.
And as far as the joy and fun aspect go,
Yeah.
because I think that most people value joy and fun to some degree.
Totally.
And so it seems like if there was that person who, they go in and they do these disciplined training sessions, but that doesn't feel good to them because they want more joy and fun in their life, especially after a long day of work and all the other responsibilities that we have.
Yeah.
Because I hear about this too in my sessions with people. And so it seems like with that type of person, there also needs to be a reckoning of those values. So, like, what would you say to somebody like that?
Oh my gosh, be creative. So, you can do so many different things to, like, my question. It's so funny. Is like the question is followed with a question, like, what type of things do you do in the climbing world that make you happy? Typically, people are like, oh, I climb with my friends in the gym, or I climb the new boulders that have been set, or I really like to climb at this angle, or I really like to climb on this wall or a training board. Or it makes me feel good when I do bicep curls. So do them. And do some other things too, right? Like, before this, we talked a little bit about like acceptance and commitment. And you had asked a question, like, what does the commitment part, I think, the committed action, like, for somebody who values joy and excitement, and I can just like speak into the mirror on this stuff, like, be with your friends. You don't have to negate your friendships and your community in a training session to succeed. You can like start your training session with like, go climb with your buddies for like 20 minutes or something, and then engage with the asks from the coach or whatever the training cycle is asking of you. Modify it, or schedule in an open day during the week. Like, on day 1, I go and I do some strength and conditioning. On day 2, I go climb with my friends. And on day 3, I do this endurance work. And so I still have this cycle of like visiting the people that I like to be with. And on the weekends, I go and I climb with those people. Or if fun and enjoyment has nothing to do with climbing for people, figuring that aspect out for them, for them is important, right? Like, people might inherently love going and training on their own, but they still need enjoyment and fun in their life. And so what are those things? And that's where this like holistic perspective comes in, of like, oh, I really like to go out to dinner, or I like to go get a drink at this fancy bar, or I like to go dancing. Like, I work with a guy who I've worked with for 6 years or so. And he goes dancing twice a week. He's a really good dancer, and that brings him a lot of enjoyment. And if I told him that he can't do that, or that he shouldn't. Because it's not like going dancing is chill for him. Like, it's like, oh, yeah, I get off of work and then I go train and then I eat dinner and then I go dancing on Tuesdays. And then I'm out until like 11:30 at night. And so I'm losing some sleep and it's tiring. And so you can see a prescription for somebody that would say, like, we should take that out of there because that's not optimal for your sending. But from my perspective, that undermines his experience as a human being, which eventually will burn him out on climbing. And so if I want to help this person be in the climbing world longer, which inevitably will give them more success or a higher chance of success in the future to achieve what he wants, we're going to keep that dancing in his life. And so I think it just requires some flexibility in people's scheduling and what they're choosing to do, and some digging, like, or creativity. How can you weave in community engagement? How can you weave in a style of climbing that somebody really likes? To me, that, like, I value joy and happiness, and, like, I'm sure you do too. Like you're saying, it's potentially an inherent thing in human beings, and like, if you I think it's a misconception that those who participate in all sports at the highest levels are very rigid in what they do. They have routines, but part of their routines, typically, there is like play going on, enjoyment. If you read about if you read about the development of Adam Andra or something, like, there is a lot of enjoyment happening as a kid. And so, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I think, like, in working with youth athletes, it can be really easy to move away from, like, the distinction between optimization and development for kids. Part of that development is a continual engagement of joy and, like, fun and play and those kinds of things. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that answers your question at all, but
Yeah, of course it does. Very thoroughly. I want to move to a different topic, sort of. Go back to some basics. So your approach, you said, is mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment therapy. Or that's
mhm,
one of how you work. And you kind of mentioned the commitment part of this. Can you describe what that means?
sure. Yeah, mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment practices comes from the therapy world. Comes from a therapeutic lens, and mindfulness is really just a way of being present on purpose, paying attention to something on purpose, uh, typically in a very specific uh, manner. So, like, non-judgmentally would be the, like, typical way of somebody saying that, or openness would be another way you could say that. Being open to one's experience is being mindful. Being present is being mindful. And acceptance and commitment practices have to do with, at a very basic level, um, not trying to, acceptance has to do with, is like defined in its own right. Sitting with challenging experiences would be accepting them rather than trying to avoid or push away or run away from or change. And then commitment practices are taking committed action based on an individual's values towards a specific goal or goals that that person has decided on. And so those things are intertwined with each other, and there's not really a specific directionality of them, right? Like, somebody comes to me as an athlete or a person and they're like, you know, we go through an intake process and we just chat about what they're going through and what they see that they need to work on and whatever. Depending on where they're at in their process, we might start with, building up an understanding of the things that they value. Or if they're really struggling at the moment, we might start with some mindfulness practices to build their ability to learn about the difference between their thinking mind and their observing mind. A lot of mindfulness practices, a foundation of mindfulness practices is helping somebody be present, yes. But in that process, it is helping somebody learn how to live with their mind in a more flexible and functional way. And the reason that these methods or this lens of practice resonates with me is because it's really flexible across a spectrum of experience. So you can use these things in everyday life, you can use these tools in everyday life, or you can use them in your sporting environment. So climbing, you can use them in your relationships. You can use them with an injury. You can use them at work. And so they translate across the whole spectrum of existence, and they are functional in the now. So the difference between mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment practices and, let's say, like cognitive behavioral therapy is that in cognitive behavioral therapy, and let me just back up a second, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other. They both work. Different things work for different people. This works for me and the way that I see life. And that might not sit well with others. And so, like, for a climber, from a cognitive behavioral perspective, you're trying to work on changing thought patterns or refuting negative experiences and replacing them, basically arguing against them for things that are true, right? Like, what are you struggling with for your injury? Forgive me.
Hip and hamstring and glute.
How long has that been happening?
9 months.
It's literally a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you might have, with that experience, a thought that is like, holy shit, this is never going to end. I might just be stuck like this for the rest of my life. Or somebody with a chronic injury that's long-term, they might have the thought of like, this is just who I am. I'm the type of person that gets injured. And from a CBT perspective, you'd go, okay, well, let's look at where that thought comes from. And then let's look at ways in which that thought isn't true. And then what's a statement that you can tell yourself that is true that would be in direct opposition of that thought, right? Acceptance and commitment practices, a mindfulness acceptance and commitment practice, stops at looking at the thought. So the basis of both of them is that you're going to have that thought. You're going to have, and I want to come back to this thought of like the difference between your observing mind and your thinking mind. Your thinking mind is going to have the thought, I am the type of person that gets injured. It's a rule that you create for yourself in your head, but it's not true because it's just a thought. And thoughts are not tangible. They're just images, right? And so from a CBT perspective, then we do all of this like change thinking. Or from an acceptance and commitment practice, we can just say, that's just a thought that I'm having. I see it and I'm moving on. And I'm moving on in a way that is in line with the things that I said I value and the things that I want. And it's not an act of refuting the thought. Because in part of the practice is education around the idea that your mind is a thought and feeling producing factory, and it is going to think and feel something. You, like, in some ways, you can work to control it, but you know what it feels like to try to, like, everybody kind of knows inherently what it feels like, try to push a thought away. Like, an easy one for climbers is like, I'm afraid. I'm gonna fall at the crux again. This is scary. There's too many people in the gym for me to be here right now. Or like, that person's better than me and they failed on that route. So how in the hell am I going to succeed? These are all like typical thoughts that people have that get in the way of their success. And you can learn to just see them as such. They're just thoughts. They don't have to be real. And they don't have to dictate how you behave. Because from a mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment lens, thoughts are not inherently negative or positive. They're not seen that way. I don't see them that way. The way that we react to our thoughts is positive or negative. You can still have, you know what it's like to have a negative thought and then not act on it. Like, everybody has this experience where they're like, oh my God, I'm fighting with my partner and like, I just want to throw this pitcher of water on my partner, but I don't. That is literally the experience of having a thought, not giving in to the thought, and then moving on. And that is the basis of acceptance and commitment practices.
That's really interesting. I'd like to dive into this because I think that people hear this and they're like, well, then what do I think about then?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't. The point is not trying to control your thoughts. You think about whether or not, I mean, there are a few directions, right? So you go, and let me just clarify. You're saying like, okay, if I don't have to worry about whether my thoughts are negative or positive, then what do I do?
Yeah. Yes, that too. Mm-hmm.
So you can begin to choose whether or not your thought is helpful or unhelpful. And if you can practice seeing your thoughts as that, then you can, like, if the thought is helpful for you, follow it, go along with it, right? There is totally arguments and reason for, like, I am afraid because this is legitimately dangerous. Listen to that thought, right? Act on that experience. But if there's a difference between that and like having a thought of like, oh, there's a lot of people in the gym, I don't like the way that this is, I'm gonna leave and come back later. If that becomes a problem for you, then we need to look at like, well, why, like, are you feeling threatened because there's a lot of people in the gym? Because that isn't necessarily an actual threat to your experience. And this is where values come in as a full circle experience of like, if you have very clearly defined values, then you can turn to those things and help them dictate the way that you behave, right? Values are like a guiding light for the way that we behave. And so if we have them defined, then we can see our thoughts as thoughts, thank our mind for trying to protect us, and then move in a direction that we want to move in that helps us become who we are or who we want to be.
Yeah. So you walk into the gym in that situation. You get anxious because there are so many people. The
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness comes in that you're noticing your thoughts about this and you're noticing your urge to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then acceptance would be, I accept that this is my situation. This thought and this anxiety is not helpful for me because my values are progression, challenge, adventure, and
Yes.
this is what's going to help me do that. And then the commitment is the commitment to your goal or whatever.
Yeah. I said I was going to come into the gym at this time. I recognized early on that it's probably going to be busy. And I stated before that it's okay that it's busy because I have this very specific thing that I want to achieve in the future, right? Like I have an upcoming trip that I want to be uh, fit for. What, you're going to the red for a while? You said like
Not
it's.
anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. We can commiserate on injuries in a little bit. Uh, um, so, but here's the problem. People use sport psychology practices or tools as a parachute. And so, like, it's like the same thing as physical therapy. When people are hurt, they do their PT. When they start to feel better, they stop doing their PT. Then they get hurt again, they start doing their PT. And then they stop when they feel it's good. The same thing happens in our mind. When we don't feel good about things, or we're starting to recognize that our mind is getting in our way, we're like, oh, maybe I should address this via sports psychology. But you can't just like say, okay, Bill, when you go into the gym, I want you to think about it this way. You have to practice thinking about things that way. And that is where like mindfulness practices come in, where you say, okay, I want you to spend time in a daily fashion doing any number of mindfulness exercises. One of them might be like most common thing is like paying attention to your breath for an X amount of time, 30 seconds to 10 minutes. And, the really cool thing is that this researcher, her name is Amishi Jha. She wrote this book called Peak Mind. And in all the research on mindfulness that she did, yes, it is extraordinarily beneficial for a number of reasons. And I think it's important to highlight those things. One of the things that she gathered was that 12 minutes a day on average is just as beneficial as doing or is in the ballpark of beneficial as thinking about it and I have to sit for 3 hours a day to practice this mindfulness experience to gain benefit from it. But the benefit of engaging with mindfulness comes from doing it, not being good at it. And that's where people get stuck. It's like, oh, I'm not the type of person that can just sit and be mindful. Okay, so don't.
Yeah. I want to elucidate this with an experience and another thing from a book. So The Way Out, that there's a book on neuroplastic pain.
You said
And
The Way Out?
yeah, it's so good.
Okay.
And so he has this little anecdote where he went and saw the Dalai Lama speak, and the Dalai Lama was like, "I know people who only meditate 1 hour a day." Ha ha ha. And everybody in the audience laughed at that. And he was like, "What?
Yeah.
I have to meditate. I have to sit and meditate and it's all about like every moments throughout the day that you're doing this." And one of the things that and this is exactly what you're talking about basically, is what the antidote to pain when it's neuroplastic is looking at the pain objectively,
Mm-hmm.
noticing it, observing, describing it to yourself in a non-emotional way,
Mm-hmm.
instead of pushing it away. So it's like this acceptance of it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things also is he's like, our minds, like you said earlier, are just these machines that fixate on something. They
Mm-hmm.
have to be fixated on something. And if you can just remind yourself of that and be mindful. So like what I've been practicing is when I have these thoughts of my leg hurts, I'm never going to get better. I have to remind myself, like, this is my brain fixating on something. I could be fixating on something fun right now.
Mhm. Yeah, right.
And then, like, taking that moment and breathing, noticing the breath go through my nose. It feels good.
Yeah.
Like noticing other things around me.
Yes.
And I've never been one to sit and meditate. I just don't like it. It's
Mhm.
boring to me. But this kind of mindfulness, yes, I can get behind that for
Right.
sure. And it's very effective.
Yeah.
Like
That's
sometimes
really
the pain just goes away when I start observing it.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that experience defines what happens typically when people practice looking at their thoughts. Like a great way, I think, like one of the ways that I introduce that all of this work is like the difference between your observing and your thinking mind. And that's what you're talking about. Like your thinking mind is going to do that. It's going to like predict. It's going to imagine. It's going to compare. It's going to do all these things, and those are natural. That experience is natural from evolutionary like standpoint. Our brains are wired to fixate on they're more hardwired to fixate on the like quote unquote dangerous experience or the threatening experience because that's how we were when we were like evolving. If a stick cracked in the woods, whatever, 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, that might mean that there's a tiger in the woods that's going to kill us. And so we got to think about that. And so our brains are still doing that with thoughts now. Like, oh, I think this way about a bunch of people in the gym. That feels anxiety inducing for me. I don't want to feel that way, so I leave.
Hmm.
Rather than focusing on things like carrots that we want. This is like a good way to think about it. Sticks and carrots. Sticks are things that feel threatening. Threatening things produce hormones in our body or chemicals in our body that elicit a like fight, flight, freeze response. Carrots are a way of thinking about the things that are good, like rewarding things or the things that we want. And those also produce chemicals in our body that make us feel better. And our bodies are naturally wired to think about the sticks more or to highlight them more. But
And
if
so the
we,
carrots in this situation, when you walk into the gym and it's anxiety inducing, the carrots are like, these are my values, remember my commitment, etc.
this is my goal, climbing makes me feel good. Why does climbing make me feel good? Like I've had the opportunity to work with this young athlete, this 9-year-old girl, and she described her feelings of anxiety as poisonous mushrooms in her stomach. And she was like, "Yeah, before I get on a route or a boulder problem, I feel like I have these poisonous mushrooms in my stomach, and then I don't know what to do." And so the question is like, okay, well, when did they go away? And she was like, "Well, when I start climbing, they fly out of my stomach and I feel really good." And so for her, the act of movement, and for most people, the act of movement on the wall can absolve them of their anxious feelings. And so it's all about like sitting with the anxiety, looking at it, and then deciding what you're going to do and knowing what helps you move through it. Movement. So that's the carrot is like the carrot is the movement, the carrot is the goal. The carrots are the things that make you feel good. And that is a reinforcement, a subtle reinforcement of confidence and motivation for people.
Yeah, and that all comes from mindfulness because if you hadn't asked her that question of what makes you feel good, what makes it go away, like it's so nebulous in our minds when we're just sitting there anxious.
Oh, for sure. Because just like you were saying with this book, it's like very common. I feel anxious and then I start to feel anxious about my anxiousness. And then I'm mad because I'm anxious about my anxiety. And through feeling mad, then I start to feel sad because I'm like, oh my God, I'm just like this all the time. Like, what's my problem? This is terrible. And then all of a sudden, you're just in your head and you're not here. And the only way to make change or get better or do what you want to do is to be here. And the way that you practice this is through mindfulness, through an engagement of deliberately being with something on purpose, with the goal of just that. And so, like, going back to an experience of mindfulness practices, you're saying, like, okay, I don't like to sit and just be mindful and think about my breath. It's boring. That's okay. You can do a number of different things. You can do anything mindfully. That's the benefit of it. But you have to choose that, right? Like, you can one of my favorite things to suggest for people to do mindfully is drawing, because drawing art, like there've been a lot of research. There's been some good research on mindful doodling as a mindfulness practice, because it's two in the same. People go like, oh, I'm not the type of person that's artistic. I don't want to do that. And you're like, okay, that in and of itself is your mind trying to tell you that you're not good enough. And so if you start to practice the act of being mindful while doodling, you're doing two things at once. You're not letting your mind dictate your behaviors and protect you, and you're practicing being present with the act of doodling in a very specific way, seeing your thoughts go away and then come back to the action of doodling. And that, you can do that. You can do mindful walking. You can wash the dishes mindfully. You can have a conversation mindfully. You can read mindfully. So it goes back to this whole experience of being rigid and flexible, where you're like, I can only be mindful if I sit in this chair and I think about my breath for 10 minutes. Not true. You can do mindful stretching. Like anything. As long as you
What do you mean mindful stretching? What does that look like?
So that would be like, I go in to my space and my goal is to feel and think and see the sensations of stretching.
Okay, and not be like fixating on something else the whole time I'm stretching.
But the goal isn't to not fixate. The goal is just to be stretching. And then when your mind wanders, which I call time traveling, see it and then come back to stretching. Right? Like, so I go in and I'm like sitting on the ground and I'm stretching my hamstrings. I want to be able to like engage with, as best I can, the experience and the feeling of, how does that stretch make my hamstring feel? Where does it pull? Is it tight on this side or this side? When I do that, am I like breathing through it? Am I holding my breath? How does the rest of my body feel? And then like, I'll be like, oh, the heel hook on this route was like this. And then I'm like, oh, I'm not stretching. Okay, I'm just going to come back to stretching. And that is like what you might call a mindful rep, where you're like in an activity and then out in an activity and then back into the activity and then out again. And that is it.
Can we do this with with several of the most common issues with climbers' mindset?
Say that one more time.
Can we do this mindfulness exercise, basically like what it would look like for some of the most common issues that climbers have? So like if I'm on a route and I'm afraid of falling, and you mentioned it a little bit, but if it's actually a safe fall, but I'm still scared, or if I'm comparing myself to somebody else, or like how would mindfulness come into all of these things?
Those experiences are challenging for sure, especially the fear of falling. And to be totally honest, that's the fear of falling is a place that I feel like I am most inadequate to help people. There are others in the community who do a really good job at like helping folks work through fear of falling, but I will freely admit that I'm not the best at that. And But an experience of being mindful in that situation, let's say I'm climbing on a route and I'm above a bolt. Or what typically happens is actually I'm at a bolt and I'm afraid to climb away from it. The experience of being mindful in that situation would be seeing what I am actually thinking. Because it's typically not like, oh my God, I'm afraid of this. It's like the bolt's going to fail. I'm going to fall and break my leg. Or maybe I have already done something like that and I'm worried that that's going to happen again. Or it's like, if I fall here, I'll just have to like pull back up the rope, and I don't want to pull back up the rope. And so my suggestion in those experiences is it's a multifaceted thing. But let's just, for example's sake, say that this person is in terrain that is within their capability. The challenges of the experience, their skill level meets the demands of the experience. Because that is like, if we back up even before that, you go like, well, are you in the right spot? Are you above your skill level? So let's assume that they are right in that perfect challenge zone where it is within their capability to climb this route. Then seeing their thoughts as just an experience of what they are doing, and it's their brain, their mind trying to protect them. If they have done the practice of being mindful away from the wall, which is necessary, then the directive is like, all you need to do in that moment is say, you can do a few different things. We want to develop an anchor for somebody that pulls them back into the present moment, out of their head. That's the goal. The goal is to be out of your head. Because like I said before, if you're in your head, you're not here. We all know, I give this example to a lot of people. You know what it's like. If you've driven a car, you know what this is like. You're driving down the road, you're traveling to a destination, and then a couple minutes goes by and you're like, holy shit. I don't even know how I got here. I was just like zoning out. People call it zoning out. I call it time traveling, because you're thinking about something in the past, something in the future. You're not here. And so like on route, if you're thinking about like, oh my God, what if I break my leg again? Oh my God, what if the bolt fails? We don't necessarily need to label it. We can just say, I see that my mind is trying to protect me. I see that I am thinking that I might break my leg, and then come back to something here. That is your anchor that pulls you back in. So for a lot of people, that's like a big, deep breath. But the trouble is that it's not as simple as just, okay, I'm going to go up on this route, and when I feel fear, I take this big, deep breath. Because if you haven't practiced the experience of doing it, it won't help. Like, I mean, it might. But just like getting good at climbing as a skill, being mindful is a skill that you have to practice. And if you don't practice it, then how can you get better at it? And so let's say this person's anchor they've chosen is like the feeling of chalk on your hands. Then they're having this worry in their brain, and they go, oh, I see my mind is trying to protect me. And then they go back to their anchor, which is the feeling of chalk on their hands. And then they already have a planned action from that, from the ground. They're like, my goal is to send this route, or my goal is whatever, to get to the 6th draw. But I'm at the 4th and I'm worried about falling. I see that my mind is taking me there. I go back to my anchor, and then I move on. And you do that over and over and over again. And it's not this like magical experience that makes people better, but it gives them a tangible thing that they can then practice and get good at that. And the better they get at being in the present moment, the better they get at recognizing when they're not, which is the trouble. right? You say like, most people are good at recognizing that they were gone in the middle or the end, like after they're already lost in their thoughts. And my goal is to help people get there quicker so that they can come back to what they're doing quicker. And like in a practical stance, you're just like, okay, if you can come back to the present moment faster on route, you're definitely not going to be as pumped. And if you're not as pumped, you have a better chance or a better opportunity of doing what you said you wanted to do.
Well, or you're less likely to take.
Yes, exactly. And here's the thing. With all of this work, we're just trying to be psychologically flexible. So a great Stephen Hayes is the psychologist who primarily developed and popularized and brought in acceptance and commitment practice into the therapeutic world. And he has this great quote, that has to do with values, which is hold on to your values lightly, but pursue them vigorously. And so the point of that is that we need to be flexible about what we do. And we need to have some self-compassion when we don't do the things that we say we're going to do. Because that in and of itself produces an unpleasant experience, right? You go like, just like you're saying, this is so common. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to try to climb to the 6th bolt and then, take there. But instead I take it the 4th bolt because I was afraid. And now I'm pissed at myself because I didn't do what I said I was going to do. Because what does that mean about, here I am again, just like I'm a failure and like I'm never going to be good at this. And everybody else is bad at this or good at this. Everybody else around me is so much stronger than I am. But I'm not. My goal for that is to help people see that they're going down that path quicker. Not to necessarily prove to them that it's okay. It's all about
That what's okay.
My goal is to help people see that they've gone down this path of like being in their head quicker so that they can come away out of that feeling of anxiousness and comparison to other people. Because one thought leads to another, leads to another. And taking at the 4th draw, even though you said you wanted to take at the 6th draw, is okay. It's okay to have an experience that isn't what you set out for it to be.
This is like deep perfectionist work here.
Totally.
A lot of people just heard you say that and they're like, no, it's not okay.
Well, my argument against that would be, how's that working out for you? How is it working out for you to create these rules and regulations by which you need to follow?
So and what do people typically say to that?
That sometimes, it's worked in the past. I don't like the feeling of being out of control. And that's okay. Perfectionistic tendencies in the long term don't produce great results for athletes. They typically produce burnout, staleness, injury, leaving the sport altogether.
Yeah. I mean, when I work with people, one of the things that is a very common theme is the reason behind their perfectionism and their need to not be seen failing, not be seen falling, all of that is their need for belonging. And like almost all of my mindset clients, that is the common thread because that's so human. It's like the most human thing.
Yeah, to belong.
And so what's that?
To belong.
To belong, right. And they feel like if I don't climb 12C, if I don't send this boulder and everybody else does, they're not going to want to be with me. I'm not going to be part of the group any longer. Like they literally say those words.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wonder with your work, do you address that and how does that come into play here?
Oh my gosh. So common. Um, well, it takes a lot of time. The first way I address this, I mean, first of all, I should say that the moment things become like clinical in their nature, when we're looking at like addressing perfectionistic tendencies or um, anxieties like this, if it's like something that is debilitating their everyday life, then I'm like, it's not like, hey, I can't touch this. It's just like, hey, I'm a sports psychology professional. I'm not a clinical therapist. And so it might be the case that you want to see a therapist to address this experience of like perpetual anxiety about these things. And at the same
Or like deep trauma work. Yeah.
exactly, I am not trained to work with people through trauma, nor should I. The challenge with a lot of this stuff is that, um, yeah, we don't even need to go there. But I just would say that from a baseline, my first thing is that I'm looking for, is this out of my scope of practice? Like, is addressing this perfectionistic tendency or this need for belonging or this anxious state, is it too much? Like, are we touching something that is out of my training? Um, and what stays within my training? Okay, so like it's not clinical in nature. Then we're talking about like, all right, well, have you ever asked these people why it is that they enjoy being around you and with you? Are you comfortable to do such a thing? Do you feel safe enough to talk to them? Typically, the answer is yes. Like, typically, these people are the people that I work with, like they're longtime friends with these people, but they still have these thoughts of like, well, I'm taking forever, and they climb 514, and I climb 511, and so like I think just making it, first of all, is normalizing the experience that they're having. It's not abnormal for them to be worried about those things. Second is addressing the state of, this is your mind trying to protect you, and it's not true. There's These things are just like thoughts that produce feelings that don't feel good. That is just your mind trying to protect you. And then helping them see themselves as a whole human being, right? They are more valuable than their climbing. How do you do that? Well, you can like map it on a piece of paper, or you can map it on a whiteboard. I do this all the time with people. Put their name in the middle of a whiteboard and you say, tell me about yourself. Who are you? What do you do in life? What are things that are valuable to you that include rock climbing but are more than father, son, mother, sister, brother, painter, you know, computer scientist, friend, mountain biker, lover, dog, mom, piano player? Do you play the piano? Right. That adds value to your life. The trouble is that people get caught up in thinking that climbing is the only thing that makes them valuable. Most of the people that I climb with, I do not climb with them because they climb a certain grade. I don't give a shit about that. I care about if they're a good person. And so helping people see themselves as good people can help reinforce the idea that it is true. Because inherently within climbing, people value grades, which is totally fine. Grades are very important in a lot of ways, but they also handicap us a ton because people go, I climb 511, they climb 514, they don't care about me. So normalizing an experience of such a thought and helping people understand that they're more than 511 is important. The same thing, and you know what this feels like, I bet. I know what this feels like too, and it drives me nuts. When you get injured or when somebody gets injured, they become their injury. And that is reinforced societally, where people, happens to me all the time. And it's totally out of love. People are like, oh, what's up, dude? How's your back? Hey, how's it going? It's been a while. I heard you need to have back surgery. How's that going? But I'm not my back surgery. I'm Alex. Back surgery is required for me, and my back is injured, but that's not all that I am. Just like you're not just Neely the podcaster, you have more value than that. A tremendous amount of more value than that. How do you get somebody to believe that, though? That's that people have to want to believe these things too, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a wizard. I can't I'm not like Harry Potter, you know?
Yeah. And I do think that having conversations with people is really important. And one thing that I do to take it even a step further with people with this is there has to be an acceptance that yes, some people might actually abandon you because you don't climb this hard.
Totally.
And so then the question is, do you want that person as a part of your community in the first place?
Amazing. I couldn't have said it any better than that. Do you want them at all?
Like, are they deserving of you?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. That's really hard.
It's not something we're taught to think.
No. I think that one of my favorite things, and why I really this goes back to like the very beginning question, like why did I get into this at all, is because I love talking to people and learning about them. And with coaching, I mean, you can choose to coach in your own way anyway, long, short, emails, texts, whatever. I like talking to people and helping them learn about themselves. I like learning about people, which facilitates growth and trust within them. And when somebody trusts you, when you build respect and rapport and trust through like listening and being empathetic, they start to trust what you tell them or ask them to do. And as long as they're committed to it, as long as they're committed and they know that their commitment will wax and wane and will be strong and weak, and there are times to like persist and be gritty, and there are times to give up and move on. As long as they know those things, people typically come out the other end. And I will say that through my process of working with people, I have worked with people who have come to the realization that they don't like climbing. And you know what? That is the biggest win, because like I said in the beginning, I don't really give a shit about people sending. I want them to be happy, healthy, whole people. And that facilitates better performance, because then they're not undermining their experience. And if I have somebody who comes to me as a rock climber and leaves as a mountain biker, hell yeah. Fuck. I don't care. Do they enjoy what they're doing and like themselves and believe in themselves a little bit more? That's the important, that, like, holy shit. I think that it's often, you can see people who achieve so much in climbing, and you like put them on this pedestal, and then they like have kids, get married, have a full-time job, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't really climb anymore. What does that tell you about them? Like, that climbing isn't everything. And that's their experience, and you can have your own. But like, it's important to remember that just because you achieve a certain grade doesn't mean that like, the red carpet's going to roll out and you're going to be like, yes, I am the shit and everybody will respect me. I think it's more about like figuring out what you want and why you want it. What do you value? And then trying to live your life more in line with those values. And that will help you be more engaged and have more motivation and be more confident in yourself, because it allows you to stay within yourself, as opposed to like, well, they climbed the green problem way better than I did. How can I can't do it that way. My favorite thing is going down to the front range and like climbing and not talking to a single person, but just like watching everybody kind of like behave in a beehive.
What do you notice in the front range?
Oh my goodness. Well, um, everybody's kind of like, well, first of all, nobody spots anybody, and it drives me crazy. It scares the hell out of me.
You're supposed to spot people?
Stop. My partner, oh my God. She like, oh my God, she has a field day. Just, I'm like, like scared out of my mind. But I do see that people kind of, I see they give in to like the social experience, like, gravitating towards the people who climb hard, gravitating away from things that feel hard for them. Like, it's just like the common thing, People do it here at the cliff too. It's like not like people in land are absolved of this experience. They're like stay away from a certain type of climbing, and they gravitate towards the thing that makes them feel good. And there's not anything wrong with that. It's all about like, what do you really want in your experience? I will freely say that like I've had conversations down in the front range that make me feel uncomfortable, and I have conversations here that make me feel uncomfortable where like somebody will be like, "Oh, this is Alex and he climbs really hard." And that makes me go like, what do you say to that? Like that's been a common conversation that I've like, people are so much more than what they do in climbing. And if you
Yeah,
can,
right. It's the same thing with your injury. It's like,
yeah,
this is Alex. He has a back injury. This is
right,
Alex. He
totally.
climbs hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is Alex. That's like, to me, I get super black and white about it. I'm like, hi, I'm Alex and I'm short. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want? I have a size 7 shoe. Like that's, to me, it's the same type of conversation. And so helping people understand that they are so much more than their climbing liberates them. And when you are liberated from that experience, that like internal spinning, and you have a better chance of being here in the present moment, you have a better opportunity to enjoy what it is that you said you want.
Man, we could go on tangents here. I will say one thing is all of these things are really reinforced. I feel like, a lot of times we have these thoughts in our minds about
Mm-hmm.
what people think of us and worried that we're not going to be respected or hopeful that we will be respected because we hear people speaking about others. And so then we extrapolate it to that's what they must be thinking about me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we learn. And so when you go to a cliff and the first thing somebody says to you is, "What are you working on?"
Mm-hmm.
That's how they're labeling you then.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she's working on this grade. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to categorize her now.
Mm-hmm.
And if I ever see her on anything lower than that, I'm going to wonder or, whatever they do. And so I saw something written where they were like, just wait, you know, 10 minutes or ask 3 questions before you ask, what are you getting on?
No.
Like,
Okay.
how are you? What's been going on with you? Whatever it
Yeah.
is. And so that
Yeah.
people are more humanized at the cliff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's wonderful. And I'll add something to that you made me think of, and I appreciate that you just said that. Gosh, thank you. Like, ask 3 more things. Um, I love your hair. The challenge with that, right? Like, you're saying, you hear other people talk about like grades or the way that somebody else is climbing, and then you internalize that and think like they're going to judge me based on how I'm climbing. Or all of these people, I have this experience of comparing myself to all of these people. But like an inherent part of the mindfulness practice is being non-judgmental, right? So you're trying not to judge the things that you think about, or you're trying not to judge the experience of deviating from climbing, right? But in a well-rounded practice of mindfulness and working on not being judgmental is not judging others. Because the more you judge other people, and even just thinking like that person is going to judge me, and so I start to be defensive, that is judgment on them, because you're predicting that they're doing something that you have no idea that they're doing. And so that is inherently being judgmental about them. But if you can work as a person to not be judgmental about other people, that builds your strength and skill of being mindful and not judgmental about all things.
And yourself.
And yourself. Because if you're trying to not be judgmental about yourself, but you're judging others all the time, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And none of this is easy, but people forget that they have to work on not judging other people too. And that spans a spectrum of statements, not just like, oh, she's ugly or he's fat. It's like, oh, they're thinking that I'm like this, but you have no idea what that person is thinking.
When I think it's also important to point out, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, that it's not just watching your negative judgments, it's your positive judgments too. It's like, oh, he's really good at rock climbing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And therefore, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just sent that thing and therefore I'm the shit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
let's take that down a notch.
Yeah.
Because then the more you judge things positively, the more you're going to judge things negatively. Like you're just on this very dynamic spectrum then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We could keep going down this rabbit hole, but it does bring up this thought that I had a conversation with a friend of mine who him and his partner were climbing. And his partner is working on not being afraid. And they turn to him and they say, well, it's really hard for me because I'm climbing with all you guys and none of you are afraid of anything. And you're fearless. You don't ever get scared. And so I feel like I'm really like having to put up a guard here, and it's way harder for me to deal with my fear when you guys are not afraid of anything. And he said, well, wait a minute. I've been climbing for as long as you've been alive. You have no idea what my experience was like 15 years ago climbing. I was nervous then. I have developed the ability to not be that way now. And so I'm saying this because a part of not being judgmental about others is recognizing that you might not know anything about them. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for trying to emulate things that other people do. They climb really hard. I want to be like them. We don't get to just have that. You have to then be that person entirely.
Right.
And you might not want to be. So all of it comes back to this experience. Just to like sum up what I would say is like, it's about learning about who you are and what you value and what you want, and being here, present, more often, because you can't do anything if you're not here. And it's natural to deviate from that. Totally fine. Just your mind.
Yeah, it's just a practice to continue to come back
Yep.
to
Totally.
here and now.
Yeah.
Okay, that was great. Great conversation. I think we covered a lot of the things that we wanted to. I want to know how people can work with you.
Yeah. I have a website. It's the longest name in history, but it's easy. It's good for making a statement. It's innersourceperformancepsychology.com. You can also email me directly at agbridge37@gmail.com. I'm really responsive that way.
And
And
you work with people remotely.
yep,
And
I work with people remotely, in person. I work with youth individually, youth teams, competitive teams, adults individually and in groups. Beginner to elite, all levels are worthwhile. It's one of the best questions that's ever been asked to me. I understand why a sports psychologist would be needed for an elite athlete, but I'm just a person. Why do I need you? And I think that's what we've covered this whole time, is like people who are engaged in this sport as an everyday individual struggle just as much as those who get paid to do it.
Yeah.
Often more.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Cool. Well, I have loved this conversation, and I'm really happy for you.
Thank you.
And I'm also inspired by you, like you having just taken this path and followed your passion.
Thank you.
And I'm excited for you to get going.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
Thanks for talking to me.
Yeah.
Or letting me ramble.
No, your ramblings are lovely. Cool. Well, hopefully I'll see you in the Front Range. You can observe me and judge my behaviors too.
No, I would never do it that way.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Alex. I appreciate
you're very
it.
welcome. I'm happy to have been here. Thank you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Alex Bridgewater. Again, you can find him at innersourceperformancepsychology.com. I know he just told you that, but this is a podcast, so you probably weren't writing it down. And you can also email him at agbridge37@gmail.com if you want to work with him in his office in Lander or online. Okay, so I think that's all I've got for you. If you need any help with your training, you can always find resources at TrainingBeta.com. We have online training programs that are self-paced, easy to use, very affordable. We also have your personal coaches, Alex and Matt here, who will make really individualized training programs for you. I do mindset coaching. I also do nutrition coaching. I'm a bit booked up right now, but you can definitely get on my schedule in the next month if you go to www.trainingbeta.com. All right. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I'll talk to you next time.